You need to share.
Yeah, can I?
Share the screen. You want to share mine?
Yeah. Mhm. Awesome, thank you.
Okay, so could we start now? Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So thanks for coming to this seminar. And today we have invited Dr. Wenqing Zhao, who is the assistant professor of the Whitman College in the United States. And she is also going to be the assistant professor of the City University of New York, starting from this September. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Okay, so and it's also our honor that she studied before in our department, Department of the Religion and Philosophy. Today her topic will be from conceptual misalignment to conceptual engineering in a private case study on emotion from Chinese philosophy. So today I think the arrangement would be that Wenqing will first present 45 minutes to 1 hour, and then I will make some comments, and then we will open to the broad discussion. Okay, so
yeah. Okay. Thank you so much, Baldwin. Yeah. So it's indeed a great pleasure for me to be here because Hong Kong Baptist is my alma mater. And then, yeah, I feel actually very, very excited to be back in this building again that I've studied for many years for my undergraduate. So my topic today is from conceptual misalignment to conceptual engineering. This talk is a talk on actually comparative methodology, right? Like how can we do comparative philosophy, how to do comparative philosophy, right? To launch this presentation, let me actually first bring your attention to the appendix. If you can look at the screen with us, if we have the handout. So in the appendix, actually, I've listed a passage from the discourse on connectedness, which is in the third of the 5 groups of discourses in the early Pali canon, right? So SN 3622. So this passage is titled "The Theme of the 108." Right. So basically, Buddha and one of his disciples, bhikkhus, is having a conversation about what are the different types of feelings. What are how do we do a typology on human feelings and human emotions, right? So Buddha says that I can use different method of exposition to come up with different types of typologies of feelings, right? And he said first, if you're thinking about 2 kinds of feelings, there's bodily feeling and mental feelings. These are called 2 kinds of feelings. And if you're thinking about dividing our feelings into 3 kinds, there's pleasant feeling, painful feeling, neither painful or pleasant feeling. These are 3 kinds of feelings. Right. So then something interesting come into the picture. Then the Buddha says, and what bhikkhus are the 5 kinds of feelings? The pleasure faculty, the pain faculty, the joy faculty, the displeasure faculty, the equanimity faculty. These are called the 5 kinds of feelings. And then Buddha came back to the parallelism and says, what are the 6 kinds of feelings? Feelings born of eye contact, born of mental contact, and so on and so forth, right? So here, if you look at this highlighted passage, you realize that there's something like tricky. There's something weird going on, right? If we translate this little paragraph into plain English, he's saying the pleasure faculty is a kind of feeling. The pain faculty is a kind of feeling. Joy faculty is a kind of feeling, right? It's actually very weird, right, in English. If you say the pain faculty is a kind of feeling, right? In English, we don't think the faculty of a feeling is a feeling itself. right? Oh, so this passage alluded me to the fact that there's something going on at the conceptual level, at the very foundational level of these culturally situated philosophical systems, right? Some like concepts sometimes are actually just a teeny bit at odds, and they're not very obvious. However, when you drill into it, you realize, there's something is going on here, right? All right. So let's come back to this idea of comparative methodology, right? How do we crystallize non-Western and history of philosophy? I call it NW&HP, materials in contemporary anglophone philosophical context, right? Most of us, working language is English, right? We do Chinese philosophy, or we do, early modern philosophy. One is non-Western, one is history philosophy in contemporary Anglophone philosophical context, right? So we often encounter this issue is that when you're crystallizing NW&HP material, you will see that if you deploy a thin NW&HP concept, then you are oftentimes asked, what is the relevance of this very thin concept to the material itself, right? Why even subscribe to NW&HP, right? The other situation is that if you deploy a thick non-Western or history philosophy concept, and then the problem becomes, what is the relevance of that to contemporary philosophical discussions, right? How are the NW&HP material and the contemporary material talking about the same thing, right? So we are often, as researchers of non-Western and history of philosophy, caught in this double bind, right? It's either that we're doing non-Western history philosophy too thin or too thick, right? So what is happening here is that I think there's something going on at the conceptual level, at the very fundamental level of comparative philosophy, right? So if you imagine that there's one shared practical and phenomenal field of region X, right? Region X. So I don't want to title this region yet. Let's say just this shared human practical and phenomenal field, right? Region X. So this region X is conceptualized by different cultural and historically situated philosophical systems with different concepts, right? Concept alpha from system A, concept beta from system B, concept gamma from system C, right? And the analogy is that there's different types of cartographic symbols from different map systems, right? All the different culturally situated philosophical systems are like map systems that deploy just slightly different cartographic symbols, right? And then what's going on next is we enter into a linguistic coordination, right? We start to compare the different maps developed from different culturally situated philosophical systems. So linguistic coordination is a very important feature of human dialogue in contrast to monologue, right? The process of crystallizing non-Western and history of philosophy material in contemporary Anglophone context is more akin to dialogue than a monologue. Right. So NW&HP research almost always entail an act of speaking to the contemporary Anglophone philosophy, right? That involves varying degrees of linguistic coordination. Linguistic coordination identifies conceptual counterparts by investigating similarities in intentional features, extensional instances, and usage in context, right? And in the process of such coordination, we experience a conceptual misalignment, namely the features, incidences, and usage of two conceptual counterparts do not align perfectly, right? So conceptual misalignment is a misalignment between two conceptual counterparts, right? There's many conceptual counterparts. For instance, we say like in Confucianism, there's Ren, right? And its conceptual counterpart, a lot of people think is benevolence, right? Or goodness, right? So Ren and benevolence or goodness are a pair of conceptual counterparts, right? Similarly, with concepts such as emotion that I will discuss more in depth later, like qing and emotion is a conceptual counterpart, right? So the degree of conceptual misalignment often, but not always, maps onto the distance between a given NW&HP material and contemporary anglophone philosophy, right? So you can see that there's a little diagram here. Most NW&HP materials are distant from contemporary anglophone philosophy in both the cultural dimension and historic dimension, right? For instance, ancient, which is the time dimension, Chinese, which is the cultural dimension of philosophy, right? So ancient Chinese philosophy is distant from contemporary anglophone philosophy, in both of those dimensions, right? But you can see that, if you put these two dimensions out, is that people like John Locke is distant from contemporary Anglophone philosophy in a historic sense, right? So in the time sense, right? There's also contemporary, you can say Taiwanese philosophy, right? It's contemporary, but it's distant from contemporary Anglophone philosophy in the cultural sense, right? Basically, you can see that the conceptual misalignment often, but not always, maps onto the distance between a given NW&HP material and the contemporary Anglophone philosophy, right? The further away they are from Anglophone philosophy, the bigger the conceptual misalignment, right? Okay, so next we come to my contribution to this whole discussion, right, is something I call general conceptual schema, GCS, general conceptual schema. So examination of conceptual misalignment, in my opinion, can help us develop a more expansive general conceptual schema, the map of all maps, applicable to the shared practical and phenomenal realm, right? GCS is a higher level representation of the various important conceptual models for the given region X, right? GCS can be used as a general guideline for further investigation of the region, but GCS itself is not a concept, right? So GCS, you can see that GCS is a synthesis of the different concepts developed to study this phenomenal and practical region X, right? And then GCS is a higher level of a representation of the different important conceptual models, right? So next, I want to give just two quick case studies, right? And then open the floor for some discussion, right? So the first case study is on emotion concept, right? The abstract concept of emotion, right? Qing, right? The abstract concept of emotion, the umbrella term for all emotions, right? In English is emotion, right? It has a conceptual counterpart in ancient Chinese philosophy called qing, right? So I give an example of how this concept, how this word qing is used in an excavated text from the Guodian tomb called 性字命出, right? 性字命出 is arguably the most important disquisition on emotion in early China, right? And here I give you a summary of how this concept of qing is being deployed in the 性字命出. So the taxonomy of basic emotions joy, anger, sadness, grief, is not based on the phenomenal features of these emotions, right? Namely that, how we divide joy from anger, separate joy from anger, from sadness and grief, is not based on how they feel to us differently, right? Inside, right? Phenomenal features is not based on such phenomenal features. It understands emotions such as joy and grief as having a shared progression structure. Emotions also are understood to have two gears, the cognitive affective gear, namely 心, and the physiological expressive gear, namely 生, right? The two lead into one another. 心变则生变，生变则心变。Right. So in a sense that you can see that emotion in 性子命出 is understood almost like a bicycle, right? Or one-wheeler, right? You pedal it forward, right? It has two gears, the inner affective cognitive gear that mostly capture some of the phenomenal features of this emotion, and the physiological expressive gear like 生, right? Like so, your 声, you sound angry, right? When you're feeling angry, right? When you're experiencing anger, right? And then 声变 leads to 心变, 心变 leads to 声变, right? The two gears pedal and then, lead into each other, right? And lastly, the establishment of ritual draws on natural emotions. Ritual also identifies, express, and transform emotions. Right? So that's how this, seemingly simple concept of qing is being carved out in the text of 性子命出. Right? Qing and counterpart, emotion, in contemporary anglophone philosophy, on the other hand, has two main features. It's carved out like this, right? First of all, emotions, anger, joy, sadness, etc., are differentiated from one another by how they feel to a person. Namely, they're differentiated based on their phenomenal quality, right? Which is something that the 性子命出 actually rejects. The subjective experience of emotion is conceptualized either as a cause or a result of physical indicators of emotion, right? So the subjective experience, which is understood as of core importance to an emotion, right? Is the quality of this emotion is conceptualized either as a cause or as a result of the physical indicator of emotion, right? However, it's not understood, like in the 性子命出, as this kind of progression structure where 生 pedals into 心 and 心 pedals into 生. Right? Okay. In contemporary anglophone philosophy, the subjective experience is either a cause or result of the physical indicator of emotion. Right? So where do we go from there, right? My suggestion is that we need an expanded general conceptual schema, GCS, right? First of all, we need to understand emotions do not necessarily need to be, even initially, differentiated by their phenomenal aspects. Right. When we develop a taxonomy of emotions, we do not need to even initially do this taxonomy based on how anger feels differently from sadness to a person, right? Studying an emotion event as a specimen of emotion and analyzing it in a highly differentiated and static state might undermine the connectedness and movements of emotion. And certainly in a movement model of emotion, which is as illustrated in the 性子命出, the inner affective cognitive states and the outward physical expressions are the two basic gears of emotions, right? So they feed into each other. They're both also accessible by society, right? 心 is accessible through things such as history, classics, literature, whereas sheng is accessible by ritual, right, and other behavioral kind of rules, right. So the society have access to both of the gears of the emotions. Right? The expanded general conceptual schema suggests new possibilities for us to study change as well as use emotions. Then I want to give another example, which is individual emotion, shame, 耻, right? The concept of shame also has a counterpart in classical Chinese, 耻. So shame is a mix of embarrassment, anxiety, fear, and dislike, right? This is talking about in contemporary anglophone philosophy, right? Shame is understood as a mix of embarrassment, sadness, anxiety, fear, and dislike. Shame is also understood as an undermining of one's global self, right? This is how shame is differentiated from guilt, right? In contemporary anglophone philosophy, guilt is more directed towards individual behavior, individual events, whereas shame is an undermining of one's global self, right? If you're saying, I'm ashamed of myself, you're undermining your entire self, whereas you are guilty of certain behavior, you're guilty of not coming to class, you're guilty of running somebody over, so forth. Right? Also, shame in contemporary anglophone philosophy is a response to external social value. It often comes stem from the interaction between one's own understanding and external social value. And shame leads to self-destructive or antisocial behavior in terms of both withdrawal or aggression, right? There is a very strong kind of anti-shame culture of movement, especially when it comes to education in contemporary Anglophone context, right? Oftentimes little kids are taught that you shouldn't be ashamed of yourself. No matter what happens, you should be proud of yourself. You shouldn't be ashamed of yourself, right? Shaming somebody, actively shaming somebody is considered a vicious act, right? Mostly because of how shame is understood as an undermining of one's global self and something that leads to self-destructive and antisocial behavior, right? So overall, shame is considered a very negative emotion. Here, negative is not only referring to the phenomenal sense, it felt negative, but also in the kind of normative sense is that this feeling is bad, right? We shouldn't feel shame ourselves and we shouldn't shame other people, right? However, a Confucian concept of 耻, shame, is quite different. You can see like 耻 is about one's own or others people's action or character traits that are in violation of ritual norms, right? You can feel 耻 for yourself, but you can still feel a kind of a precarious 耻, right? Feel 耻 on behalf of other people, like feel shame on behalf of other people. 耻 requires a person to have a sense of appropriateness in a given situation and an expectation for oneself or the other person to act in accordance to such appropriateness, right? So in order for a person to feel 耻, some of the prerequisites are that the person have to have an understanding of what is inappropriate and also have a kind of expectation that I rise up to the appropriateness called by the given social situation, right? Moreover, 耻 is understood as a crucial guidance for moral action and virtual development, right? So 人不可以无耻, right? Like humans, we cannot live without shame, right? So 耻 is understood as actually at the very core of your moral compass. Okay? Fourth, 持 is closely connected to the development of the virtue of courage, 勇. The virtue of courage is seldom discussed actually in Confucian philosophy, in contrast to its salient position in, for instance, Aristotelian ethics, right? However, we can also see that shame is interestingly closely linked to the development of the virtue of courage and appropriateness, 义, right? There's a saying, 知耻而后勇, right? Knowing shame, and then you can gear yourself up to courage, right? Okay. And number 5, so mature moral agents also know how to resist the sense of shame induced by bad social norm that carry the same structure as proper shame, but are unjustified, right? So a mature moral agent is somebody with 智, right, with wisdom. So she knows that when she is feeling appropriately shameful of herself versus when she is actually being shamed by bad social norm, right? Bad social norm. So she has the ability to make the judgment of, whether this is appropriate shame is because I didn't live up to my own expectation of social appropriateness, or this is, shame induced by bad social norms, inappropriate social norms. Lastly, the ability to feel shame and the feeling of shame have developmental values. Moral sages should only have the ability to feel shame and no feeling of shame, right? So shame has developmental values, meaning that when you're in the process of working your way up to becoming a sage, you often feel shame of yourself, right? When you fail to live up to the expectation of ritual. However, when you actually become a moral sage, which is totally possible, right, in the Confucian structure, then you have the ability to feel shame still, but you will have no feeling of shame, right? Because, for instance, Confucius would say, like, at age 70, I follow my heart's desire without transgressing the boundaries of ritual, right? At that stage, the moral stage already, like, know how to perform in a non-action kind of fashion and maneuver within the boundary of ritual, right? So he will no longer violate the proper ritual requirement. Okay, so from there, we can see that we can come up with an expanded general conceptual schema of shame, right? First, the phenomenal feeling of shame, it is in general a kind of negative sensation, which might be a combination of two or more feelings. Common suspects of, the mixture of shame include embarrassment and dislike, embarrassment and dislike. Second, in terms of the content of shame, it necessarily involves some form of interaction with the social norm, right? If there's no social norm, if you're just by yourself in a desert island, then you wouldn't be able to actually even feel shame, right? Because shame necessarily involves some form of interaction with social norms. However, it could be about actions rather than the whole person. In other words, that the Confucian idea rejects this kind of distinction in contemporary anglophone philosophy between shame and guilt, right? Because in contemporary anglophone philosophy, we just talked about, distinguishes shame and guilt to think like guilt is about individual action, where shame is about the global self, right? But such a distinction doesn't exist in classical Confucian philosophy, right? Moreover, it could be about one's own wrongdoing or somebody else's wrongdoing in terms of vicarious shame, right? Relational shame, shame felt because of a closely related person's wrongdoing, or imaginary shame, use shame in imaginary sense as a guardrail to prevent potential moral wrongdoing. So you can see that all these possibilities or potential of emotion of shame is actually not explored in contemporary Anglophone philosophy and psychology, actually, because the limited carving of the concept of shame, right? So it doesn't talk about how you can feel shame on behalf of another person. You can feel shame because how you're related to another person, right? For instance, I see BU religion department as my alma mater. So if some kind of scandal break out here, right, I will feel a kind of a relational sense because shame in the relational sense, right? Because I'm closely related to somebody or something, right? Or imaginary shame, right? Use shame in the imaginary sense, like before something even happened, as a guardrail to prevent potential moral wrongdoing. So the fit of this emotion with its content to the way the world, the way the world is that shame is only fitting when the person violates a certain social norm, right? And then lastly, the normative value of shame. The ability to feel shame when appropriate is important, as the sense of shame helps guide our moral action through sensibilities of transgressions and expectations for oneself and others to be appropriate. The self-knowledge of shame when there is a genuine wrongdoing is also important in relation to the development of other virtues, such as courage, right? Facing oneself, acknowledging one's wrongdoing, and the courage also to be better than one's old self, right? This general conceptual schema of shame allows us to see more possibilities and dimensions and potentialities of shame in the web of moral emotions, actions, and virtues. It resists this kind of specimen account of shame that focuses on one slice of the concept in isolation with its many dynamics, right? With its many dynamics. So we can see that just by drawing on the conceptual carving of shame in classical Confucian philosophy, we can already expand the general conceptual schema of shame, at a higher level, right? And showing its many potentialities and possibilities, right? And by no means I'm suggesting that we stop here. Eventually what I want to suggest is that we don't just look at the classical Chinese conceptual model. We also might look at the Native American conceptual model, the Indian conceptual model, the early modern conceptual model of shame, and so forth, right? So after we looked at all the important conceptual models of shame, we have expanded general conceptual schema that is the higher level representation of all these important models underneath, right? And this expanded general conceptual schema can reveal, maximally the potential and the possibilities and the dimensions of this region, right? This phenomenal and practical region, right? So that's how I think we should go about it, is that when we are doing so-called comparative philosophy, right? A lot of times crystallizing non-Western or history of philosophy material in contemporary Anglophone philosophy is comparative philosophy, right? So when we're doing comparative philosophy, we go down first actually to the conceptual level and see the conceptual misalignment stemming from the dialogue that we create between the different philosophical systems. And we don't have to look at the conceptual misalignment as a hurdle or as a burden of conducting comparative philosophy, but instead we should draw on it. We should really draw on it and try to develop an expanded general conceptual schema of the given practical phenomenal region, right? And go from there. Okay, so that's my whole presentation. I ran through it pretty quickly, but I want to leave ample amount of time for discussion and if you have any questions. Thank you.
Hey, thanks,
Yeah.
Wenqing, for your very amazing presentation. And actually, it's very good to see that comparative philosophy is growingly paying attention to the methodology area. I mean, comparative philosophers always like walking in the dark.
Yes.
Because our methodology is quite different. It's unlike the analytical philosophy and something like that. We do conceptual analysis, we do thought experiments, something. It seems that we have a more multiple source of methodology. So I think Wenqing's paper here shows a very good attempt in thinking how comparative philosophy can contribute to the methodology of philosophizing things in different objects. So I mean, so I think I will just throw out some of my thoughts.
Yes, please.
And then I mean, Wenqing can maybe do some brief response, and then we open to the floor discussion. Okay, so I mean, so first of all, I think the idea of GCS is really interesting. That it seems it's a map of the map. I quite like this analogy that different philosophy, different concept is like a map with a map of the map. But I mean, I would like to push a bit further on this idea because so I mean, what is the what is GCS here? Because according to your examples, it seems more like that what you are doing is that, well, we have some psychological conception of emotion. That emotion is it's just differentiate from one another by how they feel to a person. So you enrich this psychological conception by some kind of a confusion of emotion
Exactly.
from XFMC. And also in the example of shame is also something quite similar, that there's some common understanding of shame in moral psychology. And we try to enrich this understanding by the confusion conceptions of chi. So I mean, so it seems that ECS is something more like that we have an object in the Anglo-American philosophy. We can enrich it by drawing resource from the history of philosophy and the non-Western philosophy, and to make this concept to become more comprehensive. So is there any two, I mean, is there really a two levels map of the map here, or rather that we are only drawing resource to enrich the existing conception we have? So there's the first question about the GCS. And also the second question is that you talk about the idea of conceptual misalignment. And it's also very interesting because in comparative philosophy, we always draw line between concepts. And it's very interesting that we look at the Western philosophy and we look at the Chinese philosophy and we draw lines that this A corresponding to B here, C corresponding to C here. And sometimes conceptual misalignment happened, that the idea of shame and the confusion idea of chi sometimes do not match together. And sometimes positive things happen because then the conception of shame learn from the confusion conception of chi, so that's good thing. But sometimes there may be bad things. One of the examples that I have in my mind is, say, for example, ritual, that we usually translate the idea of li, 伦理礼, to the Western concept of ritual. But I mean, if we go into the context of these two concepts, they do not quite match each other. The ritual in the Western world is more like a man method, non-coercive, more like some kind of you behave in a polite way, you behave in a good way. Say you hold your fork by your left hand and your knife by your right hand. You eat properly in the restaurant. But the li in the Eastern culture, in the Confucian culture, is something more comprehensive. That it is sometimes coercive. It originated from the Zhao dynasty. It is about how the family distribute the resources. It's
exactly.
about how the son or which son can inherit the
Exactly.
the empire or the wealth. So it comes to a point is that if we use the li in the Confucian world to enrich the idea of ritual manner in the Western world, then from the Western perspective, it looks quite strange because it seems to distort the whole thing about manner. It seems to distort the whole thing about ritual. That now you are saying that eating properly in the restaurant is something coercive. So it looks quite strange. Yeah. I mean, so this is an example. So the key question is just that how we can distinguish between the Confucian concept enriching the Western concept, and the case that the Confucian concept distorted the Western concept. So
those are two great questions. Thank you so much, Baldwin. And then first of all, I want to go back to this idea that first we start with one shared practical and phenomenal region X, right? And I think the ultimate goal of philosophy is to understand this practical and phenomenal region X better, right? It's not to enrich contemporary anglophone philosophy. It's also not to revive classical Chinese philosophy. None of those, right? So I think it's ultimately how do we understand better this region X, untitled yet. Right. So we have this untitled region, right? And then people go in there and start making maps of it, right? If you go hiking, right, explore the mountains, and then you make a map of it, right? And then in the process of making that map, people discover or develop different cartographic symbols, right? Concepts basically that we use to understand this region, right? The maps onto this region, right? So we develop concepts such as emotion, such as shame, such as qing, such as chi, right? So qing and chi are from a different map system than emotion and shame. Right. So the general conceptual schema is a higher level of abstraction that oversees all these important maps underneath it. Right. However, the goal of general conceptual schema, although often represented in English, is not to enrich contemporary Anglophone philosophy. Right. So contemporary Anglophone philosophy is very robust, right? It has very important critical roles, like political roles, right, in contemporary academic activities, right? That's why we kind of always have to look at it as an important map, right? We oversee, right? But there's other important maps out there, right? And I think like we should also actively go out there to search for the lost maps, right? For instance, Native American traditions, oral traditions in Africa, and so forth, right? So the ultimate goal is for us to understand this human region X better, right? And similarly to your second question is that So in that case, first of all, how do you align Li with ritual? Is that so ritual in even the contemporary Western sense has the coercive aspect to it too, right? Sometimes through shame, right? For instance, if you are in the high-end restaurants where people were like music.
I mean, but the Chinese context, the ritual is more like a constitution.
Right.
It's a constitutional dimension that they have no. There may not be written constitution in China. The ritual is more like a kind of constitutional thing.
Right. Right.
Power,
Yes. So, right. So, in the West, right? So this idea of ritual has some coercive elements, right? However, you know, if you only understand ritual in the contemporary Western sense, you don't understand then the whole depth of potential coerciveness of ritual. Right, you actually lack such imagination of what ritual can actually do, right? If you're just vested in the contemporary Western conceptual schema, right? However, with, for instance, classical Chinese philosophy going in there, you know, it expands the conceptual schema and showing you some of the potentiality of ritual, right? And you know, and such resources were actually you know, not available, right? If you don't do this general conceptual scheme, right? Yeah. So I think first of all, when two concepts are conceptual counterparts, right? They have to have things that are aligned to each other pretty well, right? And then it's the misalignment that shows the potentiality actually of where this concept can go, right? And the multi-dimensionality and possibility of this concept, right? Yes.
Okay. Maybe, yeah. I mean, I have something to respond,
right.
but maybe, yeah. Let's stop here first.
Right.
Let's see whether we have some for this. We have some for discussion here. Yeah.
Maybe by the way, people on the internet.
Yeah. I mean, for those friends who who also listen to this talk, please feel free to type your question in the chat box. Yeah. So so we can also respond to the question in the chat box afterwards.
So yeah, maybe let me ask also questions here. And by the way, I hope people on the internet can see the mic. I suppose it's okay, but in case they want to please tell us. Anyway, okay, my questions here maybe hopefully you don't think it is too much objections to your scheme, but let's see if we can convince me or help me clarify my doubts here, not really objections. First of all, I starting from something I agree. Because I can see that you have talked about originally something very abstract about in the region X, there can be different concepts in different systems. That kind of ideas. Of course, it is a description, but also we can start from that kind of description to think about the differences. But then, your general, the GCS, the general conceptual schema, I guess I share some of the concern from Baldwin about some of the points why it is in this way, and particularly one thing I wonder is your diagram, the 2 dimensions of it.
Right.
It sounds like that your GCS is actually using that 2 dimensions as the most important matter element in the map, instead of using some other dimensions. So that part is the part that I wonder. Let me say it this way. My usual thinking is that when we are talking about some case like the emotion or that we are talking about, or some other anti-ethics case, say whether the piracy in the Zoom is actually violating our privacy, okay, whether it's violating our privacy. Or that kind of things is, okay, behind that, we have some philosophical or ethical considerations. But is that the differences here is using the culture to talk about the differences? Or on the other hand, something like utilitarianism as a comprehensive moral theory.
Right.
Can say something about privacy or can say something about emotion as well.
Sure.
And also feminism or ethics of care. They also say something about that. And then Kantian. They may also have a lot of differences or even misalignment amongst them.
Yes.
So in that sense, then okay, then we can, of course, we can still compare them. We can still say which one is better. They focus on different values that is more important. It depends on maybe on well-being, example, and then the well-being historically can be within heroism. But actually, in the development of utilitarianism, they can just forget about the heroism, just focus on well-being. Something like that. I'm using utilitarianism as an example. But this example tells that seems like then the dimension here as a very method or as a step back for the map, the dimension is not only about time or culture. And here maybe forget about the time for a moment, just the culture. The culture may not be the most important, not saying that it's not important, but in the hierarchy, it is not in the most so-called highest hierarchy in terms of the abstract schema. Instead, it may be, say, which values that we care the most in a comprehensive moral theory.
Right.
And then that theory, of course, can be related to culture in some sense. But in that kind of reasoning, culture is the second dimension or even the third dimension where we are comparing. So the comparison may be on utilitarianism to Confucianism, for example.
Right.
We can do that. But then it is not only a cultural comparison, but mainly a comprehensive moral theory comparison. Only under that, then there can be some cultural differences. But then that sounds like not really using, but it is still a GCS in terms of the logic.
Right.
It is just that replacing the dimension from culture to comprehensive moral.
Right.
So I wonder what you think about that.
Yeah, thank you so much. That's a great question. And I think I noticed like that this diagram might be confusing in that sense that by no means I'm saying that those are the two most important dimensions that when we expand GCS, we should expand just following those two dimensions, right? So this project overall, it's kind of anchored in us addressing a comparative methodological problem, right? How do we do comparative philosophy? Why do we do it? How do we break the double bind, right? Which is something that everybody who does crystallization of contemporary, non-Western or history of philosophy material in contemporary Anglophone context encounter, right? So basically, when we're crystallizing, let's say, John Locke's philosophy in contemporary Anglophone context, right? Then we will also encounter conceptual misalignment, right? And that conceptual misalignment actually stem from, the time distance John Locke has with our contemporary context, right? So that's what I meant there, is that where did conceptual misalignment of when you're crystallizing NW&HP material stemming from? It might stem from either the cultural dimension or the time distance dimension, right? And ultimately, as philosopher, I actually agree with you, is that we should treat all these theories as a kind of a normative theory, actually. And ultimately, what we're doing, what we're kind of building, what the maps we're overlooking are normative, theory maps. Yeah.
I mean, just a Mario.
Right.
Mario, just now the example of Locke is very interesting here because actually, when we interpret anyone in the history of thought, it
Mhm.
always happened conceptual misalignment. So this is also most of the literature in
Right.
history of thought is doing.
Right.
So if we interpret Kant as the ontologist, there are a lot of Kant will come out to say Kant is not the ontologist. You misinterpret Kant, something like this. Or maybe Mill is utilitarian, they'll also say Mill is not utilitarian, something like this. So it goes back to my question here, is that we always connect something like Plato with label X, Locke with Plato X, or maybe some ideas in confusion, some confusion idea with some concept in Western philosophy. But distortion always happens. So your paper seems to be saying that, well, even if there's conceptual misalignment, there's not bad.
No,
There's opportunity
exactly.
for conceptual engineering.
Yes, exactly.
But we won't say that we won't say that we have a better understanding of Kant by connecting Kant with the authorities. But if there's a misinterpretation, then it's wrong. So it comes to a point is that what is the difference between your conceptual engineering and a kind of wrong connections, a kind of distortion.
Right. Yeah, that's great question. First of all, I like us to kind of move down a little bit, right? Instead of just labeling Kant as a deontologist or something, right? You can go look into like, how did Locke carve out the concept of government, right? Yeah, Locke's government is actually quite different from like when contemporary English we say the word government, right? We actually meant quite different things from Locke's government, right? So there is a conceptual misalignment, right? Even those two words written in English are actually the same word, right? But they're also a linguistic coordination, right? In the sense that, the two can have a kind of a dialogue. They can form conceptual counterparts, right? Locke's government and contemporary government are conceptual counterparts, right? So conceptual misalignment is the only kind of works between two conceptual counterparts, right? You cannot say like Locke's government misaligns with contemporary concept of computer, for instance, right? Like those are just two different words. That means like drastically different things, right? Those are not conceptual counterparts, right? So I think first for us is like in this kind of dialogue to see the kind of conceptual counterparts, right? The gears that we can compare and align, and then see the misalignment, right? Yeah, and then the conceptual kind of general conceptual schema only actually works on these specific pairs, right? For instance, the word government, the concept of government can have a general conceptual schema, right? The word constitution can have a general conceptual schema.
Before we go on, maybe we should open the floor discussion again. Any question from the chat box? No?
Yeah. Any questions?
Any other questions? Yeah.
Yes. Hi.
Good to see you again. And actually, I have some questions, but those questions has already raised my point. And I think I just have a comment on Owen's question, and because I think in this schema, it's not only talk about to define which interpretation is better, or that we can have more understanding, or for example, Kant's idea. It inspired me that this schema can help us to develop a concept such as in Confucianism, we talk about 人义礼智的智, and Aristotle's phronesis, practical wisdom. I know there are many aspects there, many differences, but can we develop a new concept of wisdom by comparing or just connecting these two concepts when we see the conceptual misalignments.
Mhm.
I think yeah, it inspired me.
Yeah, yeah, I think yeah, this project exactly is aiming at that, is that I often describe this as that, when you engineer a sewage system, for instance, right, you have sometimes a diagram, right, of how this part can be designed differently, right, like two different options, right, and then only when you compare all the different options, you can get a general conceptual schema of like what are the possible ways of designing this particular unit, right? And I think that's very important for human understanding. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have a follow-up questions that let me see if I can
Mhm.
ask them clearly, because it seems it is actually my confusion.
Right.
So see if you can clarify for me.
Mhm.
Because we keep on talking about some conceptual misalignment, which I can understand there are such things, and then we have the GCS, but also you have said that you also agree that it is actually better to in the details comparison, it's better to do the comparison of the comprehensive moral theories.
Mhm.
That would be a way for philosophers to do, of course, but also best things to do.
Right.
Then I guess the part that I start is shall I just summarize to say that actually the comparative philosophy we are talking is comparison of different moral theories, and then just let that as the major map of the comparison, and every other element that we are talking about there, or a concept there is misalignment, actually depending on how we compare those modes. Can I see the GCS is doing something like that?
Yeah. I think like there's a tiny bit misunderstanding there. When I say like we compare, for instance, Confucianism with utilitarianism as normative theories, I meant like actually just those two things are normative theories, right? And then like, for instance, Indian philosophy is Hindu normative theory and so forth, right? However, I think one important participant of the general conceptual schema necessarily needs to be modern science, actually, right? For instance, psychology, right? You cannot talk about shame or the concept of shame without, having a dialogue with the psychologists, right? The psychologists think that they're just doing, investigations, right? Instead of normative work, right? And I think like, who needs this general conceptual schema most are also actually people like the scientists, right? Because they oftentimes work with a set of concepts, and then they don't question their default assumptions, or how can these concepts be designed differently? They just like go into the mountain with this map that they come up with, and then start to like popping out results, right? However, I think a thorough kind of reflection of what's the underlying assumptions of, for instance, the contemporary psychology, how they use shame and guilt and all those things are going to be very, very helpful for them. Yeah.
Since you mentioned about psychology,
Mhm.
make me have a follow-up
Yes.
ideas as well.
Mhm.
So can I also say that the GCS is can be used for some interdisciplinary research?
Yeah.
So we have this psychology, or that will be very useful for us to make when talk about. Well, of course, your example is about emotions.
Right.
I see that it can be parallel to a lot of time case, and then usually they do need some other kind of subjects. The knowledge from other kind of subjects. Like I thought about privacy. So privacy can be AI or those kind of subjects, engineering. knowledge of technology.
Yeah.
So that sounds also like something we can use. I mean, the GCS can
Mhm.
also extend the linguistics to
Yeah.
research. Not only
Yes, yes, exactly. I think that's a fantastic case. And again, I think like philosophers are actually immensely useful in that sense, right? Is that we can go in there and then try to show them that the default assumptions that you're working with, right, are often left unquestioned, right, in fields such as AI and even like modern science in general, right? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Mhm.
Apply ethics implications. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. That's the methodology
Right,
of
right.
the apply ethics.
Mhm,
Yeah.
mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and Yeah.
Go ahead, go ahead.
yeah, an example, an interesting example is in environmental philosophy, right? I got this example from somebody who studies Native American philosophy. So the person saying in many Native American traditions, they actually cannot conceptually separate salmon from river. So river is something with salmon in it, right? So river and salmon are always connected. Like you just conceptually, you can't break these two things apart, right? You can't differentiate, say, salmon, river, right? Whereas in contemporary English, river is river, salmon is salmon, two separate physical entities, right? How would the picture of the world look different if you cannot separate salmon from river? Right? What are the implications for us to think about the environment, right? So I think there's many actually very important wisdom, but they're kind of tucked under at the conceptual level that kind of remain undiscovered. Yeah. Mm. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it also reminds me that the world look of some ancient Chinese philosophy would be quite different from the world of the world outlook of the contemporary philosophy. That say in the contemporary political philosophy, the assumption is mostly individualistic. That individual come up first, and then we were members of some associations, member of families, or maybe a member of companies, something like. But in ancient Chinese philosophy, say for example Han Dynasty, Zhao Dynasty, that the person is embedded in the world itself, in the whole community, in the whole family. So you could not imagine that you were not a member of your particular family. You were in it.
Yeah.
And your grandfather, your grandmother, your ancestor, they were together in that context. So you can't say that you get rid of this relationship. Look at relational connection of the self mentioned by some comparative philosopher. But I mean, this also comes to my another thought, which is that so in this case, can we say that at some point some conceptions or some world outlook is incommensurate? So just now your native, your Native American cases is very interesting, because it seems quite hard to say that the contemporary American can learn from the native, can learn from the native outlook here, because there's just totally different world. It's just totally different worldview. It's incommensurate. So it comes to a point too that can we say that in some concept, maybe different cultures, Chinese and Western, they can mutually learn from each other. But in some case, say the relational concept of the self just now, or maybe that in some case in the ancient Chinese philosophy, that say in Western philosophy, there's a tradition that the mind body, they contrast sharply from each other, the dualism tradition. But in the Chinese traditions, usually body and mind boundaries are not that sharp, that the mind and body are somehow quite, I mean, intertwined with each other. So that's why, I mean, many traditions of self-cultivation, the Chinese philosophy will say that if you behave in a certain way, your body behave in a certain way, then it can somehow shape your mind. Mind and body are somehow intertwined with each other. So, so I mean, this is quite different from the Western, that mind and body, they sharply contrast with each other, two different entities. So I'm just, so my finish too long. I'm just saying that, so if the two concepts are just incommensurable, so this will be possible to be some conceptual engineering.
Right.
Go on.
Yeah. So first of all, going back to the incommensurability, right?
Yeah.
So I think, like, first of all, you still have to go in there and identify conceptual counterparts, right? So yeah, so I guess that you're not saying that there don't exist any conceptual counterparts, right? If conceptual counterparts don't exist, then we cannot have dialogue, right? We wouldn't be able to understand each other.
I mean, but sometimes it's quite artificial. Say, for example, we usually align mind with the idea of seeing.
Yes, yeah.
But I mean, but you know that if we go into it, then it's somehow quite wrong.
Yeah, right.
Because the idea of seeing sometimes always used in a way that the Westerner would not use in that way with mind.
Right.
So I mean, sometimes that alignment is quite artificial and even dangerous.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what I can say is this: is that so so linguistic coordination is actually a kind of a theory I borrowed from the study of linguistics, right? So unless you reject saying that any translations are possible, right? So languages can be translated to one another, right? You know, unless you categorically reject that, you're saying like, oh, you know, like Chinese, you can never translate it into English, because then if you think they're translatable, there's some kind of linguistic coordination, right? You can somehow coordinate English with Chinese, right? So if you think that's possible, then conceptual counterparts can form, and then conceptual misalignment can be studied, right? So that's the first thing about the incommensurability, right? I think another even harsher criticism of this whole thing is this Kuhnian realism, actually, right? Is that some people think that, you know, so there's different maps of the world, but only one map is real and true, right? And the other maps are false and wrong, right? So for instance, the Native American map, that there's one concept that bundles salmon and river, that might be just the wrong concept. There's like wrong way of understanding the world, because water is H2O, that's a natural kind, whereas salmon is organic, whatever, right? So there's that kind of realism challenge to that too, right? So I think that's that I will leave that meta issue to the philosophy of science people, but I think in terms of the things that we care most about, such as values, virtues, or even things like emotions, right? You know, we cannot, you know, confidently say, right? You know, there's a natural kind of shame. There's a natural kind of guilt or something like that, right? Yeah, we have to kind of recognize a lot of these conceptual carvings or conventions, and we have to think of like how do we get the best of each conventions, all the conventions. Yeah.
Any other questions?
I have one clarification question.
Yes.
And perhaps one comment. So the clarification question is that it seems to me the picture of like the notion of GCS is something like we start with the region X. Perhaps in your presentation, you call it practical or phenomenal region, but the discussion extends far beyond it. The science, other types of
regions, yes,
concepts, and like different cultures, like different conceptual systems of different cultures. They have set up one system, two system, three system. They are somehow conceptualized from the region X. And what the GCS do seems to me, this is where I want to clarify, is that the picture seems to be like perhaps we put the map of the Western philosophy one, and we cover the Confucian one on top of it, and somehow we identify conceptual alignment.
Yes.
In this metaphor, it seems to be like we identify two dots, like concepts that are quite similar and somehow identified to be in the same region,
Yes.
sub-region of
Yes.
the region X.
Exactly.
And, like GCS is to try to by generalize between those dots, and we try to describe what the region X actually looks like. So is it, am I understanding?
Yes, yes, that's actually a great way of describing it. I think what the GCS does is that you look at the different categorical symbols, the concepts, right, that map onto each other, right? You got right, probably like 100 of them, right? And then you develop a higher level representation of model of how all these concepts have been carved out, right? And then you kind of study the misalignment and alignment of them, right? And then you develop this kind of higher level representation, an outline almost of all the important concepts, right? And from there, you can see that when you have the general conceptual schema, it's very, very hard to take your own concepts for granted. Right, because you can always go to the dictionary and say like, oh, actually, right, there's many other ways of this concept have a variety of different ways that one can carve it out, right? Essentially, what the GCS does is that it helps us loosen or challenge the default assumptions that we carry with our native concepts, right? Which is the hardest thing to get rid of, right? It's almost counterintuitive when you say that, how you differentiate anger and shame is not because how they feel to you, right? That's counterintuitive almost, right? And it's also not necessarily wrong to distinguish them in terms of how they feel to you, right? But there are other ways to distinguish, like that people develop of how to distinguish emotions, right? Yes, so that's what the GCS does for us. Yeah.
And like speaking of this, it comes that's a point that I'm not sure if I get it correctly.
Yes.
Is that like originally, like in the one map overlapping the other metaphor, it seems to me that the GCS is something like a theory to the region X. So we tried from the particular conceptual system,
right,
and work perhaps some kind of reverse engineering, work back towards time and culture,
right,
and to see what the original region X is look like. So if we understand in this way, then I can appreciate Baldwin's first question, the very first question about the two steps about the GCS, because like under this picture, like the GCS is just enough, like actually we can, in some sense, we can say that like the conceptual system of a particular culture is also a kind of map of region X, but it's a kind of very primitive, preliminary, very selective map. And the GCS is a more comprehensive, more detailed map. So somehow I can appreciate that questions about the two steps.
Yeah.
But like somehow there are some of our discussions or some of the formulations of GCS points to a different direction.
Yes.
It's perhaps because of the word schema.
Mhm.
Like it reminds me of something like the universal grammar in linguistics.
Yes.
There are some kind of parameters, some kind of mechanisms, and when we adjust within like what the parameters are, we get those different particular languages. It's just like GCS is some kind of mechanism, some kind of descriptions of some processes, and by that working on that, we know okay how the different conceptual systems in different cultures
Mhm.
differ from
Yeah.
one another.
Right.
So I'm just wondering which
Yeah.
picture
Yes.
is a more accurate description of the GCS.
Yeah, it's closer to the latter. It's closer to the latter for sure. Latter, not the former. Like I said in my notes, GCS is not a concept itself. It's not a theory itself, right? So you know, if you imagine a map of all maps, that map is no longer a map, right? Actually, because it doesn't map onto any real world things, right? It actually is a synthesis of maps, right? It's called a map of all maps, but that's something like a catalog, an outline, a schema, but it's no longer like a map proper, right? A map proper has to be something that maps onto the practical and phenomenal region X, right? Which is what the concepts do, right? Whereas the general conceptual schema is a higher level representation of the concepts, right? Yeah, so it's closer to the latter, yes.
So if that is the case, this is following
Yes,
up,
yeah,
idea,
for sure.
then perhaps like the idea that or the saying that the GCS is in the sense of theory of the region X is not an accurate.
Depends on what you mean by theory, but I think yes, it could be said to be a theory, but yeah.
So I mean,
But-
it reminds me the distinctions of Rawls on concept and conception.
Yes.
So I mean, so from a
Yeah.
description, it seems more like the GCS is like I mean, the concept and concepting thing means that we have different conception of justice. Some may be utilitarian, some may be liberalism, some may be socialism. But we share a concept of justice, and we can exchange with each other in terms of the idea of the ideas of justice. So we have a shared concept of justice,
Yeah.
but different context, different conception of justice. So your GCS seems to be more like we have a shared shame, shared concept of shame, but we have different Confucian conceptions, American conceptions, Japanese conceptions, of shame. Something like this.
Yes, but I don't want to go into Rawls because Rawls meant something else. I think like is that when he said when he said like we share a concept of justice, he actually meant that there's something shared about conceptions of justice that we share.
But
Right.
I think
Yeah.
you also have the knowledge that there's something shared
Yes.
among the concept of shame.
Yes, we do. We do.
Otherwise, yeah.
Yeah, we do, which is represented in the conceptual schema. But for me, what's more important is the misalignment, right? Which is not Rawls's focus, right? Yeah. So Rawls's focus is like operational wise. We have a concept of justice.
Yeah,
Everybody has a concept of justice, right? Like that's right. Yeah. But that's such a great question. Yes, I think it depends on what one means theory, like in a way that you can say it's theory, schema, model, that kind of thing, right? But it's not a concept anymore, right?
It's not a description.
Yeah, exactly. It's not a description. It doesn't have direct contact with region X. It has contact with all the concepts, right? Yeah.
Okay, any other questions?
Yeah.
If no, maybe we can end today's session. So please give our appreciation. Thank you today. Yeah,
Yes.
amazing picture. Yeah, amazing paper. Yeah. Okay, so we have to show any code or something. No, yeah, okay. Okay, so thanks for coming.
Thank
So,
you.